Aslan will give us some scientific insights. That's what I'll try to do. Thank you for your invitation. My topics are specific because I will focus on 2 drugs. But of course I will go back to the main topic as I'm talking about these 2 drugs. Can we talk about the bias and what can be included within the scope of bias? There are hundreds of studies published each year, and there are the pharmaceutical companies which finance these publications, the countries that these studies are conducted in. Sometimes these are multinational, sometimes these research or studies are on all around the world. So we also need to take a look at which journals they're published in and the scientific features of the author. Now, the main point in objectivity is the problems that have got to do with methodology. Furthermore, there is, of course, competition between across the pharmaceutical markets and the pharmaceutical companies. What are the problems? The problems could be that these could be very small. Samples could be very small. So what can be done is there could be multi-centered studies. There's a high dropout rate. What can be done is the dropout cases should also be followed up. Sometimes the sample in the study does not represent the clinical samples. There are also naturalistic studies which give us information besides randomized controlled trials, so maybe we should merge all these. Relapse and remission criteria in acute exacerbations should be subject to consensus. Quality of assessors. Yes, they should have a sound background, but there are also the physicians and clinicians administering the drug, which should be different from the assessors. Another point is outpatient and inpatient cases are combined. This is an important point because if a person is hospitalized for depression, this is severity, and that's very important. So there should be different analysis. Another problem is that resistant cases and respondents are handled together, but there could be different biological basis here. In this case, in depression and schizophrenia, we can talk about 50% reduction or 30% reduction, but in resistant cases, 20%, 25% reduction in the PANSS BPRS could be the solution of this problem. Let's start with amisulpride. This is what amisulpride looks like. It does D2, D3 blockage, high affinity there. 1200 milligrams is the dose range where it's effective, and it blocks autoreceptors, presynaptic receptors, and that's why it has a positive effect. And the precursor is just the change of a little amine, and the effect is entirely different. We know that sulpride used to be used all around Europe and clinically effective. Looking at meta-analyses, we see Stephen Lloyd's meta-analyses to give an answer to this question as to whether amisulpride is effective or not. I think the next speaker will talk about this in detail. But what matters is especially these 4 drugs. And amisulpride is among them. Clozapine, olanzapine, risperidone, and amisulpride. What they say here is that compared to classical drugs, these could be more effective at a wider range of points. They are more effective than the second generations because even the second generations are not superior over these in negative symptoms as well. Why is this important? Because second generation antipsychotics have different characteristics and they are not a homogeneous group. Here efficacy, side effects, and cost should be taken into account to make individual choices. So when we say second generation antipsychotics, this is not a homogeneous group. This could be a misconception. Why? We have sometimes we have studies on rational drug use. We take a look at all these drugs. We have the classical or typical APs and the new generation atypical APs, and we take a look at their effectiveness, safety, suitability, cost, and then we come to the result. Also, we should make the selection according to the case severity, for example. What should be in percentiles, the effectiveness, the safety, suitability, by which we mean if the patient is resistant, suitability comes out as an important factor. So do we consider suitability if the patient has comorbidities. So this, in fact, the new generation drugs cannot all be tackled as one single group of drugs. Here are the cases. The first episode schizophrenics or resistant treatment cases with severe symptoms. How about obesity and dyslipidemia in a 15 years chronic schizophrenia patient? So we have some patterns in our heads, and we try to reorganize them. Let me go over this very quickly. As we're evaluating schizophrenic cases, we should not only focus on effect, we should also focus on positive and negative symptoms. So how about these effects on positive symptoms and the negative symptoms? Clozapine seems to be assessed uniquely, separately from others, because it has a very high efficacy. Here is the flow chart, so rather the chart that we work on, and make the calculations. Amisulpride. Let's take a look at Lloyd's analysis. Its effect on general symptoms is high, and when it's administered as a secondary drug, it improves the clinics. Clozapine is the best, seems similar to olanzapine, and it has an effect on positive symptoms, and negative symptoms are similar, and depression. This next slide is about quality of life, where we see it also has an impact on quality of life. And here is the side effects. Let's go over these very quickly. And in this next part, I will talk about antidepressants in general, and in specific clomipramine. You all know these classifications. There are tricyclics, MAO inhibitors, tetracyclipols, serotonin reuptake inhibitors, second generation. There are the serotonin noradrenaline reuptake inhibitors and noradrenaline reuptake inhibitors, and others. So there's a tripartite group here. Findings are also divided into three. NICE is, generally speaking, a reliable guideline, and the findings are evidence-based, so I believe, I trust these NICE guidelines. Looking at clomipramine, we see the characteristics here. It's the 3-chloro derivative of imipramine. That's why it's called chloroimipramine. It's a very strong serotonin reuptake inhibitor. Furthermore, the first metabolite, desmethylclomipramine, works as a norepinephrine reuptake inhibitor, so it has dual effects. It's more effective than other TCAs in depression treatment. It also has A1 receptor blockage, beta receptor downregulation, and postsynaptic histamine H1 receptor blockage. However, it has very serious side effects, and that's why the use is limited. In 2004 to 2007, NICE made a summary of antidepressants. Let me now focus on that. It says in mild depression treatment, there is no difference between placebo and ADs. This was also stated in the 2007 guidelines, as it was stated in the previous guidelines. It says here, if you know that there's not going to be any progression of the disease, if there are no mild or severe depression episodes in this case, you don't have to start the antidepressant, is what it says. And because of the side effects, because of the risks of antidepressants, you should refrain from using them. That's extremely important. If there are psychosocial or medical comorbidities accompanying depression, you should start AD, is what it says, and this must be kept in mind. Here is a general recommendation, which we all know, so I'm going to skip these. Looking now at TCAs, the tricyclical, what it says is there are the serotonin reuptake inhibitors, mirtazapine, reboxetine, and venlafaxine studies. These are all compared, and at the end of the study, we realized that the TSAs and the second generation or the new generation drugs do not, quote-unquote, create any difference, but hospitalized or outpatients would differ. It's more effective on hospitalized patients, but to some studies, it's just the opposite. Sometimes outpatients seem to benefit more from it. In terms of remission, there isn't a difference, it seems. But in terms of symptomatic relief, TSA and clomipramine, amitriptyline, these seem to be more effective. And in all groups, serotonin reuptake inhibitors, I spoke about the three groups. These are the most effective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. Let's now take a look at the effectiveness of treatment. We mean here side effects and tolerability. In this sense, we see that the new generations, second or third generations, are superior to TSAs in terms of side effects and discontinuation. And in outpatients, a tricyclical would be more difficult to tolerate and continue or maintain in these patients, but in hospitalized cases it's easier to follow them up, so compliance is higher. Looking now at the guidelines in Turkey, there are very well prepared guidelines in Turkey. For example, the depression treatment guidelines, optimum drug use, what are the subtypes, which drugs can be chosen, how about protective treatment, and how about the effects, modes of action, and importance of antidepressants. These are some titles of the guidelines. There is the 2007 guideline on schizophrenia and other psychotics. Chapters 20 and 21 would be most relevant for us. This has previously been stated. This is an example, an important example because case is important. If the criterion for healing would be, or remission would be, restoring functions in the long run, then tricyclicals seem to be superior. Tricyclicals and dual effect medicines. And another thing that draws my attention, which antidepressants have demonstrated superior efficacy? When I read through this article, it seems like an expert opinion, but and they also put forward the reasons, the rationale for their opinions, and that's quite good. They first took a look at the scale points that measure efficacy. To what extent does the clinical measurement represent response and remission, statistical analysis, onset of action, whether it's rapid or not, and maintenance of it, and functionality of the data, and the types of the cases. They have different evidence levels. You will remember the pyramid. At first there is the meta-analysis. It seems that if there is a meta-analysis, you cannot object to it. But here in this article it says, no, meta-analysis is not A-level evidence. And the reason is because there are some shortcomings to meta-analysis, and I'd like to talk about that now. In this level A evidences, we see randomized controlled trials, that is double-blind placebo-controlled trials, and we also prefer for level A higher group of patients, a very high number of patients, that is to say large studies. Furthermore, if one randomized controlled trial is used as a comparative, it shows probable superiority. If two randomized controlled trials show superiority, that is more accurate. And they also say that randomized placebo-controlled trials with larger patient groups are more convincing than randomized controlled trials. In meta-analysis, in level B, we will see meta-analyses. In level B, we see there are imbalances because of samples. The severity of the cases are different, methodologies are different. Another risk is that a small, minute risk in the clinic that doesn't seem to be important stands out as a very important, a major difference. Something that's not important in the clinics may look as if it's very important in meta-analyses. That's why meta-analyses are weaker than randomized controlled trials. That's what drew my attention. Again here, when is meta-analysis valuable? If it coincides with an A-level study finding, or in other words, if it is in line with at least one randomized controlled trial findings, then this could be regarded as an A-level evidence. C-level evidence is non-controlled studies, open labels, and case presentations are not within the scope. Some drugs are stated to be more effective. There are more specific ones. There are the dual effect ones. Here we see clomipramine among the classical ones. And as we see here, clomipramine seems to have an effect according to level A evidence. And in the previous studies, we see that clomipramine is more effective than paroxetine. Selçuk Bey, you have 1 minute, referring to Davos. Okay, thank you very much. I've come to the end of my speech anyway. I'd like to end by asking a few questions, a few questions of my own. Erol Bey's presentation was about placebo effect, and I always thought, why don't we give placebo to a group, leave out the responders, and continue the study with non-respondents? Wouldn't it be more biologically sound? But I see that this is not a measure of that as well. And we don't own science. It's not only in our hands. Psychologists can also criticize these pharmacological studies, and I think they have the right to do so. I think we should refrain from any type of polarization.